Bending is a really great technique for getting extra textures and notes out of the humble harmonica, but there's a lot that can go wrong along the way. I'm Liam Ward, and today I'll reveal the top 5 bending mistakes and how you can solve them. If you want to learn more about bending, check out the premium course via the link in the description beneath this video. So make sure to stick around till the end of the video when I'll reveal the top mistake that you're probably making when you're trying to bend. But let's start with number 1, and it's using a bad harmonica. So I don't think you should pay a fortune for a harmonica, but if you're using a really cheap one, the cheapest one in the store, the cheapest one on Amazon, or it came free with a Teach Yourself book, it's going to make the technique that much harder. You need to be able to manipulate the air pressure, the angle of the air when you're playing a bend. And the cheapest harmonicas are mass produced without much or any human involvement. So they're not fine-tuned and made in a way that means they're responsive. So it can be quite hard to manipulate what the reeds are doing on that instrument. So don't get in the habit of blaming your instrument, that's a bad thing to do, but it is worth paying that little bit more for a mid-range harmonica. I am using a Hohner Special 20 harmonica. This is in the key of C, that's the most common one to start with, and this is a pretty mid-range harp. It's certainly not top of the range, but it's not the cheapest. I'll put a link in the description so you can go and buy one of these, but this is my harp that I use for gigging on a professional level, and it's certainly good enough for a beginner. So it's well worth making sure to start with you're using a good harp. Number 2 on the list is pulling too hard. Now, an important aspect of bending is the air pressure. So I often talk about slurping the air. So when I teach someone to bend, we imagine that we're using a straw to suck milkshake. And when you do that, you go from more of a relaxed breath to a kind of bit of a slurp. There's a little bit of extra pressure, which allows us to get the bend. But you can play a bend really quietly. So there's pressure, but I'm not really forcing the air. So the problem comes when you pull too hard. You exchange that idea of kind of tension and a little bit of extra force for this idea of like yanking the air. And it might be that the note moves, but it's not a sustainable way of playing a bend, because long term you're going to need to be able to play it with less force. So you've got to keep your mind on that idea of slurping, because when you're sucking through a straw, you're not using all your might. It's just that little bit of tension which allows you to kind of force it through the straw. Number 3 on the list is coming too far off the instrument. So another aspect of bending is the mouth shape. So I talk about a kind of ah to oo. So when you are playing a natural note, i.e. an unbent note, your mouth should be more of a not a full-on but a and that just changes to a ooh, ooh. Bit of a change of shape, ooh, when we go for the bend. And you'll notice I'm pushing out a bit. I was exaggerating it a little bit there, but if you go too far, it's not doing it. I'm not planted firmly enough on the instrument to get that bend. So it's important that you keep the tight seal, the position on the instrument, but you still change that shape, ooh. In theory, you don't really need to push out, so, or at least not much. I mean, my lips are still clearly on the instrument, quite far on the instrument, but it's a very common problem to just push that away too much and then think, why isn't the bend happening? So it can be useful to look in the mirror, because you can't really look down and see what you're doing. So if you're looking in the mirror, you can see, especially if you're kind of at a slight angle, what you're doing, and then you can make sure you're not pushing away too much. Number 4 is tilting the harmonica. Now, full disclosure, in another video I have talked about tilting the harmonica as a way of getting a bend right at the start as a beginner, because what it does is it angles the airflow for you in the way that long term you're going to need to use your tongue for. So what I mean is, when you're playing a bend, you have to kind of put your tongue up like this to angle the airflow. That allows us to create the bend. But if you just tilt the harmonica, as a beginner, that can kind of short circuit that technique for us, and it can mean that we angle the airflow differently without having to move what we're doing with our tongue. So I suggest that sometimes for beginners as a way of just getting a bend, so that you know that you can do it, you know your instrument can do it, and you know the sound you're aiming for. But if you're continuing to do that long term, it's a really bad habit, because you can't every time you bend kind of flick the harmonica up. You know, if it's not your natural position for playing the instrument, unbent, then you're going to have to do this little flick, and you just can't be doing that, especially if you're trying to hit bends straight off the bat. If you're trying to hit bends quickly in a fast melody or a fast lick, then it's not going to happen. So you need to drop that bad habit and practice this tongue shape. So it's about creating, it's kind of like a camel's hump that you're trying to sort of create. So you can pull back your tongue, or you can think about lifting from the back. Don't lift the front, that's not going to do it. We need to angle the air downwards. So that's what you need to work on long term, rather than tilting the harmonica, which is just a thing for beginners, just to get you started. Before I reveal the top bending mistake, I'd love it if you could give me a thumbs up, and also subscribe to my channel if you'd like to get free harmonica lessons every single week. Make sure to check out the link in the description to my bending course, and also to a summary of this lesson. So number 5, and the top bending mistake that I see over and over with beginner players, is to go too fast. So what I mean by this is, if you think of all the techniques we've looked at in the previous points in this video, so slurping the air, changing the tongue shape, and changing the mouth shape, if you do those all together, you should get a bend. But if you try and rush through them, it's not going to work. So you have to practice on slow motion. You have to learn to pay attention, to be mindful, to be conscious of what you're doing, so that you can develop the muscle memory to be able to pull these bends off in the heat of the moment, in the middle of a song, confidently and accurately. So the problem with going quickly is that, imagine you're practicing putting these 3 techniques together. The tongue, if you're coming back and you go back too far, and if you change the shape too much, and if you increase the pressure too much, what's going to happen is you're going to miss the sweet spot. So the sweet spot is what I call that moment when all those 3 techniques come together and become more than the sum of the parts. So if the tongue comes back too far, you'll bend, but then you'll lose it. If you tense up too much, you'll start to get the instrument resisting. It won't want to play the note, or it'll sound horrible. It'll sound really just not a nice tone. And if you kind of go to oo too much, you'll push out too much, or you'll lose the ability for the air to even come through, so you won't even get a note at all. So somewhere in the middle, these 3 changes of shape and pressure combine to give you the bend. And it's about finding just too much, not enough. It's a bit like Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, not too hot, not too cold, just right, in the middle there. And you're only going to find that by going slowly, practicing on slow motion, not going too fast. I'd love it if you could let me know in the comments how you're getting on with your bending. which of these tips has helped most for you, or rather which mistake and how to avoid it has helped most for you. I always try and respond to as many comments as possible, so let me know how you're getting on and what you think of the video. And I look forward to seeing you again soon for another harmonica lesson. Good luck with your practice. See you soon. Cheers.